Football is basically just this: a ball, some space, and two things pretending to be goals. That's it. No expensive equipment, no complicated machine, no 12-hour tutorial. Just kick the thing over there. And somehow, this simple idea became the most popular sport on Earth. Stadiums shake because of it. Countries pause because of it. People cry, scream, celebrate, and occasionally argue with the television like it can hear them. And the weirdest part is, football is so simple that a kid can play it with a plastic bottle. So how did that become a billion-dollar global machine watched by billions? The first surprise is that football did not begin as one clean invention. Humans have been obsessed with ball games for a very long time. In ancient China, there was a game called Cuju, where players kicked a ball toward a target. In other parts of the world, people had their own ball games too. Some were for training, some were rituals, some were just people discovering that, yes, kicking round objects is weirdly fun. But these were not modern football yet. They were more like ancient hints, little clues that humans kept returning to the same idea. One person looks at a ball, another person points at a target, and suddenly, history begins. Then we jump forward to medieval Europe, where football became less like a sport and more like a town-wide emergency. This was mob football. The rules were simple because there basically were no rules. One village might try to move the ball to one side of town, while another village tried to stop them. Streets became the pitch. Shops became obstacles. People ran, pushed, fell into mud, crashed into walls, and probably ruined someone's peaceful Tuesday. Imagine opening your front door to buy bread, and suddenly 40 people sprint past you chasing a ball through the street. A shopkeeper is yelling, "Please don't play football near my cabbages," and someone screams back, "Too late!" It was chaotic. It was rough. And honestly, it looked less like football and more like a small war with a ball trapped inside it. But that chaos also showed something important. People loved this game, even when it was messy, even when it was dangerous, even when nobody agreed on what the rules were. And that became the next problem. If everyone plays football, but every town has different rules, nobody really knows what football is. Can you carry the ball? Can you trip people? Where does the game end? Is that wall a goal? Is that horse part of the defense? Nobody knows. And as the game moved into schools, especially in England, this became a big issue. Different schools played different versions. Some allowed more handling. Some focused more on kicking. Some were rougher. Some were cleaner. So before football could become global, it had to survive its greatest enemy: people arguing about the rules. One student says, "You can't pick it up." Another student says, "At my school, I can." And that is how chaos becomes paperwork. In the 1800s, England became the place where modern football finally started to take shape. Not because England invented the idea of kicking a ball. People had been doing that for ages. But England was where the modern rules were standardized. In 1863, the Football Association was formed in London. This was a huge moment. Suddenly, football had a clear identity. The game was moving away from random local chaos and towards a shared rulebook.
It meant teams from different places could actually play each other without spending the first hour yelling, "Wait, are we allowed to do that?" The ball finally got a constitution. But there was still one big disagreement: hands. Some people wanted a game where you could carry the ball and tackle more physically. Other people wanted a game based mainly on kicking. And this split helped create two different paths. One path became rugby, the other became association football, which most of the world now simply calls football. That split mattered because it gave football its magic rule: mostly feet, not hands. And by limiting what players could do, the game became easier to understand, easier to copy, and easier to spread. One player walks away holding the ball and says, "I'm taking this version." Another player kicks the ball forward and says, "Cool, I'll take the global one." Once the rules became clearer, football started growing fast. Clubs formed, local teams appeared, workers, students, and communities built identities around their sides. Then came organized competitions in leagues. Suddenly, football was not just something people played, it was something people followed. A club could represent your street, your town, your factory,
your city, even your family. And that changed everything. Because once people felt like a team belonged to them, football stopped being just a game. It became personal. A fan could point at 11 players on a muddy pitch and say, "That's my club." And just like that, loyalty entered the chat. Then football began traveling. Sailors, workers, teachers, students, migrants, and traders carried the game across borders. It moved through ports, schools, railways, factories, and cities. In Europe, clubs multiplied. In South America, football became passion, art, and identity. In Africa and Asia, the game spread through cities, schools, communities, and local competitions. Everywhere it went, people changed its flavor. Some places made it technical, some made it physical, some made it expressive, some made it fast. But the basic language stayed the same. Ball, space, goal. No translation needed. Just point at the goal. But if football was going international, it needed international organization. So in 1904, FIFA was created. At first, it was not the giant machine people know today. It was more like a small group trying to coordinate a sport that was growing faster than anyone expected. Football had clubs, it had national teams, it had fans. Now it needed a stage big enough for countries to meet each other. And that led to one of the biggest ideas in sports history. What if the whole world played one tournament? A football official probably looked at a map and thought, countries against countries? And history replied, yes, very calm idea, definitely no drama. In 1930, that idea became real. The first FIFA World Cup was held in Uruguay. And imagine how strange that must have felt. Football had gone from messy local games to countries crossing oceans to compete in one tournament. It was no longer just club against club, it was nation against nation. Flags, pride, pressure, noise, and one ball in the middle of it all. The World Cup gave football a heartbeat that returned every few years, bigger and louder each time. At first, the whole world was not watching yet, but it was about to. Because then came the players who turned football into mythology. A great player does not just win matches, they become a memory people pass around. Pelé became a symbol of beauty and greatness. This was Diga, genius, chaos, and emotion in one tiny frame. Later, players like Messi and Cristiano Ronaldo became global icons in the internet age. Different eras, different styles, same effect. They made people believe one person with a ball could bend reality for a few seconds. A kid watching a match might whisper, "Can a human actually do that?" And that question is basically football fandom. But the biggest amplifier was television. Before TV, you had to be at the stadium, hear it on radio, or read about it later. Television changed the size of the game. A goal scored in one country could be seen in another. A player could become famous far beyond their city. A tournament could become a shared global event. Families gathered around screens. Kids copied moves in streets the next morning. Football was no longer trapped inside stadiums. It escaped through the screen. Someone on TV scores an impossible goal. A kid points at the screen and says, "I'm trying that tomorrow." And tomorrow, thousands of windows around the world lost a little confidence. Then football became big business. Clubs grew into global brands. Stadiums became giant entertainment machines. Shirts carried sponsors. Players moved for massive transfer fees. Broadcasters paid huge money for the right to show matches. Fans in one country supported clubs from another country they had never visited. A team was no longer just 11 players on grass. It became media, merchandise, data, tourism, advertising, and emotion packaged into 90 minutes. Which sounds cold until your team scores in the final minute and suddenly economics becomes screaming. That is the strange thing about modern football. It is a business, but it is also heartbreak. It is marketing, but it is also memory.
It is money, cameras, contracts, and sponsors. But it is also a child wearing a shirt that is too big pretending to score the winning goal in the street. And here is the biggest reason football survived all of it. Even after the money, lights, cameras, stadiums, and superstars, football's core did not really change. A kid can still play it, with a real ball, a plastic bottle, a rolled-up sock, or something that is definitely not meant to be kicked but will be kicked anyway. You do not need perfect grass. You do not need expensive gear. You do not even need real goals. 2 bags on the ground can become a stadium if the game feels important enough. One kid says, "These shoes are the goal," and honestly, official enough. So football became the world's game because it could be both tiny and enormous. It could fit inside an alley, and it could fill the biggest stadiums on earth. It could belong to a child playing after school, a city wearing one color, or a country holding its breath during a penalty. It started as many different ball games. It became organized through rules. It spread through people. It exploded through tournaments and television, and it grew into a global industry. But underneath all of that, it is still the same simple spell: a ball, 2 goals, and a reason to care. Because before the billion-dollar transfers, before the World Cup finals, before the stadium lights and global icons, football was just one human looking at a ball and thinking, "I wonder what happens if I kick that." And somehow, billions of people still understand the answer.